From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I'm Deanna Markham. I'm the Associate Librarian for Library Services at the Library of Congress, and I'm delighted to present writer and illustrator Alan Say. Alan was born in Yokohama, Japan, and from the age of 6, he dreamed of being a cartoonist. At the age of 12, he became an apprentice with Noro Shinpei, his favorite cartoonist. When Say turned 16, his budding career in art was abruptly cut short. His father, dismayed by the lack of opportunities in post-war Japan, decided to move to America. Say left Tokyo with no knowledge of English, but with a sense of adventure, traveled to California. In 1972, Say illustrated his first children's book, and until 1987 was a part-time illustrator. He made the decision in 1987 to make book illustrating his full-time work. During that year, he illustrated The Boy of the 3-Year Nap, which won the Caldecott Honor. In 1989, he decided to work full-time at what he most likes to do, writing and illustrating children's books. His newest book, published by Scholastic, is Drawing from Memory. So please help me welcome the very talented Alan Say.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy and absolutely overwhelmed to be here. I may faint away, and I have a tendency to lose the thread of my thought and talks frequently, so you'll have to help me along. I get lost a lot frequently. All right, a little bit about myself. I was born in Yokohama, and I lived. Yokohama is a large city, about 30 miles south of Tokyo. And when the war, Second World War, became bad, came to the mainland Japan, bombs started to fall, and my mother took me and my younger sister, who has appeared in my latest book for the first time. She never has appeared in any of my other books. She's always called me an only child. Anyhow, when I was 8 or 9, my parents were divorced right after the Second World War. Nobody in those days divorced in Japan. This is the crack that Tokida makes in this book. Only American movie stars get divorced. It was an unknown word. Kids used to run around in our neighborhood and point at me, he's the son of the divorced parents. And I had to go and ask someone. Well, I'm of the generation when an average household in Japan had 1 or 2 living maids. And I had to go up to mine and ask her what the word divorce meant. And when I was 11 years old, I was sent up to, actually my mother came to claim us. And I was sent to Tokyo to live with her mother, my grandmother, the wife of my sweet grandfather, who is a hero of Grandfather's Journey. My grandmother was not sweet. She actually ruined the life of everyone that she came in touch with. And what's interesting is that she appears largely in my autobiography called The Innkeeper's Apprentice, which came out in '79. And my depiction of her is not so bad. When you read that book, you think, well, Mr. Say is always bad-mouthing his grandmother, but she doesn't appear to be such a bad character. So in this picture, I actually graphically show her what she looked like. But she did one interesting thing, which I owe to her, and I don't think I've ever shared this with anyone. She was an old, stodgy, old-fashioned Japanese lady who lived alone until I came. And she was very stern, and she was also cheap. She loved to see movies, however, it was improper. She wouldn't go out and see a movie by herself. First of all, this was considered not proper for a Japanese lady. She always wore a kimono, by the way. So she made a deal with me. Koichi, that's what she called me. I will give you the money to go see movies, provided that you come home and tell me what you saw. So, okay. I love movies, of course. I overdose on movies. But the deal was that I had to go home and tell grandmother what I saw. And the movie that I most distinctly remember is Rashomon, the great Kurosawa movie, which had just won the international award in Cannes, France. And so I went home. I had no idea what the movie was about, by the way. It's a complicated story, told from 4 different views at least. And I sat down, faced my grandmother. Grandmother, and she had her tea ready, a little tea cake. I said, well, it's a love story. And she closed her eyes and she sighed. And she began to listen to me. Of course, I started telling her this nonsensical story. I had no idea what the movie was about. And then, but I'm watching my grandmother. I describe this process in my book as watching a sleeping tiger. Sometimes I wanted to grab the tiger by the tail and swing it if I had the strength. Anyhow, I suddenly realized that I had this power over this very much feared person, that as long as I kept talking, she would sit there with her eyes closed and listen to me. And once a month, my mother came up from Yokohama, where she was working, and to deliver money and lots of gifts to us. What I don't tell in this story is that my mother had been born in San Francisco and retained her American citizenship. She was an enemy alien during the war in her own country, or her parents' country. And my father, anyhow, when the war ended, she was able to get a job as a U.S. civil servant for the Naval Department, U.S. Navy, and she was paid in American money. And this is how she was able to support all of us, send me to a fancy school in Tokyo, and so on. Anyhow, my mother one time came up from Yokohama, and I overheard my grandmother talking to her. Listening to Koichi is just like watching the movie. Unwittingly, she was trained me to become a storyteller, which I never dreamt of becoming. All my interest was in the visual arts, and I was good at them. I could only draw. So, it was the same grandmother who made this deal with me when I was 11. I was a very bad student. I had been to 6 grade schools by then. She said, come here, sit down. I have an important thing to tell you. If you study very hard, and if you can get into Aoyama Gakuin, a very famous private school in Tokyo, that she would allow me to live alone. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean, grandmother? And she says, we will rent an apartment for you where you can be a serious student. I made sure that she meant what she said, And I stopped drawing and I studied for the first time. And lo and behold, I discovered that I had a very good memory. By that I mean I could read something and I could retain what I read. I think most children have this, and they don't know it. I didn't know it, certainly. But my grandmother was dangling my own apartment in front of me. All I had to do was study and pass this exam. By the way, it was almost impossible to get into this school because it started from kindergarten and went up to the university level, and they all moved up from kindergarten up. So an outsider like me practically had no chance. Well, I got in, incredibly. And I started living alone when I was 12 years old in a one-room apartment. This is what the story is about, drawing from memory. And I have been interviewed several times, quite a number of times, since the publication of the book. And the question they all ask is, how was it possible? Was it a normal procedure for a 12-year-old kid in post-war Japan to live alone? No. It was in a very unusual case. What was it like? For me, it was paradise. Boy in his treehouse. And the other thing that Americans cannot imagine today, or if they could ever, Japan, post-war Japan was absolutely safe. This is a comment that I make in the story. The first night, I'm in my room. I go out for my first meal out on my own, and I buy a newspaper, which made me feel 12-year-old kids do not buy newspapers. And this made me feel very grown up. And I read this extraordinary article in the paper, which you will have to find out by reading this book. To make a long story even longer, I discovered that there were other boys, well, most specifically one other boy who wanted to be a cartoonist. I thought I was unique. I thought I was unique in the world, at least in Japan, for wanting to become a cartoonist. Nobody wanted to be a cartoonist. It was just not respectable. I was told this by my father time and time again. So, I have my room now. I was in this fancy school. I could finally realize my dream. So I went and crashed the studio of my favorite cartoonist, Noro Shinpei. The Americans have this comfortable condition that whatever one has to learn in life can be learned in schools. Everybody goes to college. Well, when I was growing up, when you wanted to learn a craft, you sought a master. And this is what young samurai did. And I thought I was being a young samurai, going out into the world, look for a master to serve under. As it turned out, when I grew, I didn't realize until I was in my 20s, so grown up, that's not what I was doing. I was trying to replace my father with a man whom I could love and admire. And when I walked into Noro Shinpei's studio and he took one look at me, and I think he intuited that. And I became his third disciple, age 12. And I learned how to draw from him. And not drawing funny faces either. I was made to go through the French academic way of learning, that is École des Beaux-Arts style of learning. We drew statues. Venus de Milo, Brutus, those were the two that I drew most often, with a stick of charcoal, fresh bread as an eraser, which nobody remembers today. That's where the kneading eraser comes from, by the way. How much time do I have? It's a very long time. Okay. All right, I told you how storyteller, to be called an author boggles my mind today. I freely admit that I'm some kind of an artist, but to be called an author, I never write. I draw first. When I do a story, I go through what I call a doodling stage. I take a sketchbook and start drawing. I think it's my attempt to tap the unconscious. I sincerely believe that images come from the deeper part of the cave than do words. Despite what the Bible tells you, I think images came first. So I try to draw, and occasionally when I'm lucky, when I'm feeling well, when I'm thinking well, the lines flow, things come out. One of my greatest heroes in my youth was Saul Steinberg, whom I had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing and photographing. And he frequently drew his hand holding a pen, from the tip of which his ideas, so whatever he was feeling, would just flow out. And this is what I try to do. But when I think what I'm trying to do, I go to pieces. I'm trying to draw and not think. I'm going to wander all over the place, which reminds me of what Picasso said. At the time when he attended an exhibit of children's art, and this is what he said: when I was their age, meaning children who had done the beautiful art that he was admiring, I could draw like a Raphael. But it took me all my life to learn to draw like them. Now, I don't have the genius of Picasso, but I'm 74 years old. This is exactly what I'm trying to learn right now, to be able to draw like a child, that is, spontaneously, without thinking. So this is what I try to tap when I begin working on a book. When I began on this drawing from memory, this is based on The Innkeeper's Apprentice, if you know that book. The idea of making a picture book out of it did occur to me long ago, but I had nixed it because I don't believe in self-pleasurizing. I don't believe in doing sequels. But 4 years ago, my longtime editor at Houghton Mifflin, Walter Lorraine, the legendary Walter Lorraine, retired, at which time I got a literary agent for the first time who brokered a 2-book contract for me with Scholastic. And Andrea Pinckney, the first editor that I worked on, she is the editor for this book. She is the one who asked me if I would consider doing this, that is, to make a picture book out of it, based on The Innkeeper's Apprentice, and I said yes. But when I began, I had no idea that I would come up with what's known today as graphic novel, and that I would be in this pavilion, inaugural pavilion. And here I am. And I still don't know what a graphic novel is. Quite frankly, I've never seen one. And if I do one, if I do see one, I will probably say, well, that's manga. Well, manga in Japanese means funny picture. And that's what it is. But when I started on this, the working title was a scrapbook. That's exactly what I intended to do. I didn't have a storyline in mind. And I sweated every day. Every time I would finish, I started from the first panel, I would finish it, and I had no idea where I was going to go from there. So I would paste some photographs, and I went on, well, what happened next? And it was a process of remembering. And I didn't know how to end the story either. Well, I did know the ending, of course. Ending was when I left Japan to come to this country. Okay, I will draw a couple of drawings. I've been signing books for a number of years, and I usually do a little self-portrait instead of saying to John. I mean, a lot of people ask me, "Well, can you give this? I'm going to give this book to John, my best friend. Can you write John, the best cop, kind of thing?" And I said, "No, I'll just give him a little drawing." Okay, this is. First, I will draw what my master, how he depicted himself. I don't know of another cartoonist who put himself in his cartoon strips, and my master always appeared in some of his famous, better-known strips. And one fall, the first year I became his disciple, he put me and my fellow apprentice Tokida in one of his serials, which I had completely forgotten. Okay, he used to draw himself like this. Maybe this should be turned on. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. He had lots of wild hair, big nose. And he always dressed himself in a monk's robe. I don't know why that is. It's probably thought he looked something like this always. And it was all this wild hair, which he was always combing with his hand. And when I became a children's book author, I started to put a little drawing of myself. And it looks, I'll draw the whole figure now. And this is exactly, to this day, I'm imitating my master. And this is where the wild hair comes from. Since I'm at it, one of my earliest books, Once Under the Cherry Blossom Tree, is based on my great uncle, my grandfather's, sweet grandfather's older brother, with whom we had to stay during the war. And he's the hero in the Once Under the Cherry Blossom Tree. And this is what he looked like. I've drawn this hundreds of times for kids who love this gross, nasty man. And he eats a bunch of cherries, swallows a pit. A little tree starts to grow from the top of his head. It's one under the cherry blossom tree. Okay, what else should I talk about? I talked about my grandmother. Oh, my father, that's interesting. One of the interviewers first asked me, "You show your father only once in this book, the back view of him." Very perceptive. He's the only one who caught it, and as it turned out, my interviewer had a lot of problems with his own father, and he picked up on that instantly. It's very interesting. It's the only way I can depict my father to this day. I may show him in my next book, but I'm debating already. There are a couple of things that I would like to talk about. There were three men who influenced me greatly at this period, from the time I was 12 to I was just turning 16 when I came to this country. The three men were, first of all, my master, Noro Shinpei, and then my fellow apprentice, Tokida. Then there was a third guy who was my upperclassman. He was 3 years older than I at this illustrious school. He was already in high school when I began, in the middle school. And he was going to be a great artist, and he was preparing himself for the entrance exam to the most famous art school in Tokyo, which is in Ueno. He was an incredible technician. But art, as it turned out, wasn't really his great love of his life. And he was a karate expert. Now, when I found out, I was astounded, because in those days, post-war Japan, when boys wanted to take up martial arts, it was either judo or kendo, that is the sword fighting. And karate was not even considered a sport. It was a dark, mysterious weapon that only the Yakuza knew about, the Japanese mafiosos. And here was this guy who had been not only was he taking karate, but he had been studying it for a long time. I'm told, so he's 15 years old. And I asked him if he would teach me. And he did. And he had a great desire to come to America. He wanted to come here as soon as possible. Whereas I wasn't too sure. I wasn't really crazy about the idea of coming here because I had this great sensei. Anyhow, in 1957, we had a reunion. He did come over. And we met in Long Beach, California. And he loved what he saw. And he wanted to stay. So I got him the first job, and this is what happened. A karate dojo had just opened in Long Beach, California in 1957. Nobody in this country, I don't think, knew anything about karate, or much about karate, I would say. But some GIs had come back from the war, and anyhow, this burly, blonde man read a few books on karate and gave himself a black belt and opened his shop, and he was teaching the local police force, these huge men, and they were doing everything wrong. I knew this. So I went and knocked on the door. I said, "Look, I know a real karate man. Would you like to see him?" And the guy was fascinated. "Oh, please, bring him in." So I take Orito-san in there. His picture is in this book, by the way. He was a tough fellow. And he had his own karate-gi, that is the robe, and his own real black belt. And he went in and he started to do this beautiful set piece, which is called kata. And the guy blew his mind. This huge man, probably twice the size of Orito-san, practically went down on the floor and begged him to become his student. And so I got Orito-san the first job, and soon, a few months later, I discovered that he just wanted to see the rest of America. He went to New York City, where he ended up staying 10 years. He worked for an ad agency as an art director. He could draw like a Renaissance master, I have to tell you. But he was also he held a fourth grade black belt in karate, which was probably the highest grade in this country. And he founded the New York Karate Club in '59, which still is in existence. And the club proceeded to produce some of the great American masters of karate. My dear friend and upperclassman was essentially one of the pioneers of American karate as we know it. The other thing that happened, you've already heard this yesterday, I'm sorry. I have moved 39 times in my life, and I don't think I'm through yet. And during my many moves, I carried photographs, most of them black and white negatives, which I had never prints made of. And when I began to put this book together, I searched through my negative files, and I came across this picture, which I had taken when I was 15 years old. I never thought that I would eventually become a photographer in San Francisco. I used to denigrate photography as an aspiring painter. There's a picture in this book which I had never printed until recently. And it's a picture of the third disciple. He was the oldest of three of us. And his mother, he invited me to his house one time, and I had this brand new camera, which my mother had given me. And I took this picture. I made this picture, printed it. I was astounded. It's a beautiful photograph. So I sent a copy of it to Chieko-san, that is my master's, one of my master's daughters who lives in Japan, along with a drawing of her mother that I did for this book. And I asked her to send this picture to Kubota-san because I knew they were in communication. But Kubota-san I'm 74 and I have not seen him since I was 15. This happened on the 26th of October last year. I received an email from Chieko-san saying, yes, I finally sent the photograph to Kubota-san, and he saw it on the 26th. And he showed it to his wife and said to her, I am very happy to feel so close to my mother. And he died that very afternoon. I don't know what that means, but I was horrified, and I sent her, Chieko-san, my regrets. And her husband somehow thought that the whole thing had been preordained and that it was a beautiful story. But it's a very Japanese way of thinking, and I'm... Anyhow, okay. I don't have anything more to say. You have to ask me questions. Thank you. 10. We have 10 minutes. Anybody? Any questions?
You left for America when you were 16, but what did you and your friends think about America, like when you were a little younger, during and after the war?
Well, during the war, of course, we were enemies. And when the war ended, my first encounter with Americans were the American Marines. And I made a book about that, The Bicycle Man, the two Marines who came to our school, and one was a black man and the other one white. Are you familiar with that book? And this black man in this dress uniform does all sorts of tricks on a principal's bicycle. And I remember the story so well because it was on a sports day and I hated sports. And I was praying for a typhoon. And there was not a cloud in the sky, and I was made to run these stupid relays, and also which I would just quit in midway, and my teacher would come running across the playground and grab my hand and make me finish the race. I was in tears. Suddenly the whole place went dead. 2 American soldiers were watching us. This is the story of the bicycle man. In 82, the book came out in 82, and I somehow got a hold of my first grade teacher, Mrs. Morita, one of the 2 great teachers I had in my life. And she said, if you come back, I'm organizing a class reunion from 1945. First grade class reunion in Sasebo, Japan. So I took a suitcase full of The Bicycle Man, about the story that I mentioned. I'm sorry, I'm going along, spending a lot of time. Okay, the short of it is that nobody remembered the incident. And they thought, first of all, I was the only one who had gray hair. I'm talking about 1982. And so, oh, what happened to you? Is that what America does to you? The answer is yes. And I passed out the books in the dead silence. Then somebody started to giggle. They looked up at me. No. So I began to think that I had imagined the whole thing. No, that's just not really possible. Okay, it all has to do with memory. I call this collective oblivion. It was such a difficult time in Japanese history that everyone conveniently forgot about it. And one of my interviewers recently was, is the artist's memory different from the memory of other people? And I said, I don't think so. Most people have the option of forgetting. It's a survival thing. Artists do not have that option. And I think many of us suffer from what's known as hypermnesia. It's exceptionally exact and vivid memory, and often associated with mental illness. But our whole act of creating, so-called create was a grand word, making books or anything, depends on that memory. The only way we can get rid of it is to put it down on paper. Okay, next question.
Alan is not a Japanese name.
No.
I wonder how you came to use that.
My full name, when I came to this country, was James Allen Koichi Moriwaki Sei. Sei was an invented name by my father, who was a Korean orphan. Didn't have a name. Alan, I told you already that my mother was born in San Francisco. I would like to think, I hope that it was, that Alan was her first boyfriend's name. I'm a romantic, yes.
How does the book Tea with Milk relate to you?
That is a story about my poor mother. It's a story about her sense of triumph, which I wish that she had in her real life. She was taken back to Japan when she was 18 years old because primarily her mother, my grandmother, didn't think that America was a place to bring up a proper Japanese young lady. So upon my mother's graduation from high school, she was taken back to Osaka and put into a Japanese high school. She had to go through a high school education all over again. And at age 18, she rebelled and she ran away. And she essentially eloped with the first man who spoke English to her, who was my father, who had grown up in Shanghai, spoke 6 languages, one of which was what was known as King's English, and my poor mother was very impressed by that. And I think she regretted, we all regret it for the rest of our lives. Nitty-gritty of our dysfunctional family.
I have 2 questions. What advice would you have to an artist, illustrator, and how do you think an artist sees the world differently than other people?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. First one is what?
What
What advice I give?
Yes, and then the other one is how do you really think that artists see the world differently than other people, and how?
View the world. Do artists view the world differently?
Yes.
We just have thinner skin. And my advice is that, as I say, memory is the most important asset that an artist can have. And I advise all children to keep diaries. I wish I did. I kept sporadic diaries. In many cases, my sketchbooks are my diaries. Frequently, I carried around a suitcase full of photographs all my life. And many of my stories are based on the images that I've been carrying, most of them in black and white negatives.
Hi, Mr. Say. It's really nice to see you. In first grade, all your books were the staple of our education in first grade. So my favorite book, and always has been, always will be, I think, was Tea and Milk. And the lady sort of just asked the same question, but if you can say anything else about Tea and Milk.
Okay, my mother was not an elevator girl. Never was. It's my invention. She worked in the office upstairs. Daimaru department store, by the way. One of the first large department stores that went up in Japan. I think they began building it in 1935, 2 years before my birth. And when I started working on that book, I wrote a letter to the Daimaru department store for any historical fact sheets, photographs on the place, and they sent me a whole bunch of old Xerox copies of the store itself. The customers who went into that wonderful, do you know Daimaru department store at all? They had to remove their shoes, footwear to get into the place. I mean, it was really like Taj Mahal, just marble floor, beautiful place. I could not depict, it wasn't in me to depict my father pictorially, so I had a model for it. My Chinese chiropractor's assistant in San Francisco. I took a bunch of pictures of him, used him as my father.
I bought your book yesterday and read it.
Yes.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book. But I'm kind of curious, which I read last night. There's a panel where when you are ready to come to America, you have burned all your sketchbooks. And yet just now you said that we should keep diaries.
Yes.
I keep my life in my sketchbooks.
Yeah.
Why would you have burned all your sketchbooks?
Well, first of all, I couldn't carry them all. I actually saved only one sketchbook because it was only half full, and I didn't have the heart to burn it, and I carried it with me to draw in it. And when I reached Southern California, I was thrown into a military academy, and I was using it one day, and one of the owner's wives admired it, so I gave the whole sketchbook to her. Okay, I'm just turning 16 at the time. About 5 years ago, I received a package from the Japanese American National Museum in LA from someone I know who works there. He said, I received this package, and as it turned out, it was that sketchbook that I had given to a certain person who died, and her daughter was going through all her possessions, came across this book and thought I might like to have it back. And lo and behold, there sandwiched in it that's where these drawings come from. All my struggling with hands, trying to learn how to draw hands, it's from that sketchbook. Not only that, there's only one drawing that I have that was done by Tokida, and it was sandwiched in that sketchbook. 60 years later, the sketchbook came back to me like a boomerang. Lots of things like that happened in the making of this book. Okay, thank you very much. I'm over time.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.